Good morning. I'm sure a stadium this large can say it a little louder. Good morning. Thank you. My name is Xavier Ramey, and I bring you greetings from the wonderful city of Chicago, Illinois. There's my Rotarians. A city known the world over, but not always for the things we in Chicago would like for it to be known. You see, we have some unreconciled things. And from that city, and from my Rotary Club of Maywood Proviso, I'm here to speak about peace. And in that, I'm here to speak about love and intentionality and space making and historical awareness and hope. Everything that you need to build a foundation, these are the ingredients for peace. Now, all of those things are possible, but it's our job as Rotarians and as global citizens to make them probable. It was always possible for a black man to be president of the United States. But until 2008, it was improbable. It has always been possible for a woman to be paid what a man is paid, but it is also, in most parts of the world, improbable. Our work at my firm, Justice Informed, and our work in Rotary is not to make things more possible in the world. It is to make them probable in the world, and to do the most for those who are kept out of the roads and the rooms of equity. We are alive now, my friends. We are alive now. And in the words of the book of Esther from the Bible that my grandmother, Eudora Ramey, used to read to me, we were created for a time such as this. The great blessing of life is that it's something that comes with joy, but it also comes with responsibility. And we have a tendency to forget that latter part, that life is a blessing that is a responsibility. In Chicago, I grew up in a community called North Lawndale. It was a place that the local paper, the Chicago Tribune, they called it the home of the permanent underclass. I grew up in intense American poverty and in a neighborhood where I often left home fearing for my life due to the gangs and the violence there. The odds were greatly stacked against me. My standing here before you today has always been possible. The likelihood has always been slim. This is a community that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. called a home for some time, as he traveled from fighting the personal racism that was emblematic of the southern states of America to fighting the subversive and creative institutional racism in the northern states, labeling Chicago as a place that had deeper racism than he had ever seen in his life. You see, the systemic racism was what built the ghetto that I grew up in. It's a place that I fight dearly for today. Some would tell you that it was our lack of character that built the violence in my neighborhood. But it was the violence of apathy and public policy and a refusal to acknowledge history that gave birth to the guns and the gangs. Fortunately, throughout King's time and into my own, the call for reconciliation has always been strong. There have been voices speaking out against the harm and the hate from many sides. The call for integration of cultures and communities has been championed by many, and the demand for justice and life has continued to this day. But after 7 generations of my family being in America, I am the first free-born generation in my family's history. I was the first generation born after the fight for peace to achieve legal affirmation from the Civil Rights Act of 1964. My mother and my father, they weren't so fortunate. They weren't born with that protection. My grandmother, who was an ordained minister in the AME church, she was known at times as nigger girl, from birth until well into her 40s. In a way, I was born at the starting line for peace. But history has no starting line. You cannot look forward unless you know what's behind you. Peace begins with that acknowledgement of what's behind us and what's behind each of us in our own lives and our own actions. Have you considered that? I'm going to tell you something really simple. When I was a child, My mother would tell me after I spilled something, or I broke something, or I got into a fight with my big brother, or I told a lie and got caught, she would say, Xavier, say you're sorry. Apologize. Now, no matter what I had done, I could never truly undo whatever the harm that had actually been done. I couldn't pay my mother back. I didn't have any money. The money was hers. But I started by saying, I'm sorry. And then we could figure out a way to show that I was sorry. I could clean up the mess I made. I could apologize to my brother. I could do something nice for the person I hurt. Now, most parents teach their kids to do that. I think they do. But somewhere along the line, we become adults. An apology gets really hard. We dig deep into the shame. And we forget that acknowledgement, saying, I did that, it caused harm, and I'm sorry, and I want to make it right, is actually the first step for peace. It shows that you are committed to the relationship and that you care about that other person. And to reach peace, we need to have that kind of acknowledgement up front, not only of the people in our lives that we choose to have there, but the people we didn't choose, who are in our world. It means acknowledging not only other people's pain, but where it came from. And acknowledging where we ourselves, throughout our history, our privilege, have been complicit. And what I want to challenge you all, Rotarians, to consider the first step in our four-step process to building peace, we must ask ourselves, is it true? I'm going to tell you some truths of my country, the United States. In my country, it is true that indigenous people were killed off by millions of European settlers and new Americans who wanted to freely express their Christian faith and make space for any religion, yet now we have immigration bans that exclude people who practice their Muslim faith. In my city of Chicago, it is true young people today are protesting because our government has allocated $95 million of taxpayer money to build a school to train police, that they put that academy just several blocks away from my home community, in a predominantly black and brown community. But they shut down 50 schools for children in those same communities. In my country, it is true that women still do not earn the same as men do for the same work, and they never have. And it is even worse if you're a woman of color. And yet, we have to somehow live together with that knowledge. We have to still make this work. Not the denial of it, the acknowledgement of it. I've spent my entire life learning to hold the tension of being a neighbor, a friend, to people who are raised to do advanced mathematics, to invent smartphone apps, yet they cannot hold a conversation with me on what is still unreconciled between us, though I am a descendant of slaves and they are not. It begins with acknowledgement, my friends, and it continues with listening, and then with learning to hold that tension and to live with it, to not dig deep into our privilege and silence it, to mute them as the story continues. We live in a world that can become enraged, not at injustice, but at survivors who won't stop speaking. People who are incensed because what they thought they could bury has now sprouted wings and flown beyond the fear that denied them agency and love, not just to warn the world, but to embrace the tension of challenging it to become more. The tension can't be eliminated. It's there. It is our global history. The absence of tension is not peace. That is just disconnection and self-righteous negation of responsibility. Peace is the holding of tension in such a way that you commit to the relationship of country and world building while centering those who need support the most. Our parents were on to something, you all. Our parents were on to something when they said, apologize to your brother, then give him a hug. Now, we all know that an embrace does not stop policy violence, but it does represent a form of acknowledgement that matters. The next step, though, is to move with the urgency of our times, as the urgency of my own identity moves me. Relationships are work. Anyone in here who's married knows that. They require an ebb and a flow of expectation, of provision, and truth-telling. Dr. King told us all, we are caught in a network of inescapable mutuality. Relationships will cost you everything. They will also give you everything. We are all children here, and we're at one point, and we know that we cost. I cost my mother dearly. I kept her up for nearly the entire first year of her life. She spent all her money on me. I ate her food. She says that the relationship, however, that she committed the most to gave her the most. That's what you'll hear if you ask Arita Ramey, what did Xavier mean to you? She knew that her commitment to accepting and holding the tension of our relationship with me was one of the most important commitments she ever made. But she was committing while bearing the burden of knowing that her children were more vulnerable in the world than she was. And she bore that burden until we were able to stand up for ourselves as her sons. She has had the privilege of being old enough to live and work and survive with the odds in her favor as an adult woman. And she just had her 70th birthday yesterday. Now, you're not off the hook. That burden waits for all of us in Rotary, if we are willing to acknowledge it. We are all children and parents in the same global family. I sit and I watch clients and people as they wrestle to accept that they are in relationship with the communities across town, across races, caught in an inescapable mutuality that is the very road that allowed for our species to continue to this point on this earth. I sit with the descendants of slave owners in my country. I sit with men who commit violence against women. I sit with corporate executives who are afraid that women will sue them because the men in the company they are aware are sexist, and they fear litigation. I sit with women who thought they were being inclusive when they started that nonprofit, but they looked around and realized that in the end it was a room of white wealthy women, and they had excluded the women of color even, and the LGBTQIA persons. I sit with them and I urge them to come higher, go faster, dig into your privilege. Privilege in this world means just having two good choices. That's it. But love means bearing the weight of relationship for us all and modeling love in a courageous way. It means acknowledging our privilege, even when we are marginalized. You see, I am the hope and the dream of the slave. I repeat, standing here, I am the hope and the dream of the slave. And I am a privileged American. I'm a systematically excluded black person in my own country, and I'm a privileged man. These are my contradictions. I accept them. I urge you all to do the same, to acknowledge it, to recognize it, hold that tension. This is the tension for our time, to change time. Our role as the volunteers and the strategists and the philanthropists of the world must move from our hearts to our businesses, to our hiring, to our supply chains, and into our homes. We cannot leave here and continue to segregate cities by choosing the bigger house where the nice stores are located or operate businesses that produce environmental harm for the poor. We must have countries in the Middle East that don't produce refugees, and we need cities in America where a black man does not have a 1 in 3 chance of being taken to jail or a 700% greater chance of being killed by a police officer for doing the same thing that a white man was doing. We need communities. We need communities where corporate male leaders know that it is not just possible that in their companies women can work and be safe, but that they moderate their policies and behaviors that drive down the possibility of harm, before it becomes the silenced burden of the children of the currently marginalized and the suppressed shame of the privileged. We have much work to do, Rotarians, in moving to the next phase of civic responsibility and global relationships. We must make the possible probable. We have a beautiful and important world to build if we can keep it, if we can keep ourselves, if we can love, if we can be life, if we can be together. Know that the fate of our very world depends upon it. Thank you all.